Okay, so we have begun recording. This is our 10th public meeting on the Isle Flood Risk Management General Reevaluation Study. So thanks everybody for joining. We'll be talking about the alternatives, our proposed final alternative array today. Before I get into the meat of the meeting, there's a few little housekeeping things that I want to say. The first is a mea culpa. I kind of started this in the email that we sent out in November, but it's actually more than just what I mentioned there. So we failed to get out some of the records of the previous public meetings in July in a timely manner. And in fact, some of them we weren't able to get up until like the last couple of days. So I want to apologize for that. There were some other balls that were also dropped in terms of people reaching out to us for interviews and talking to neighborhood boards, and there was a lot of stuff that was going on and a lot of balls that we dropped, and I could go into some of the reasons why that might have been, but the bottom line is that we are professionals and we dropped those balls we shouldn't have. So I want to apologize for that. And we are definitely, from this meeting forward, going to make sure that we don't drop those balls. And we've already started having talks about how we can strengthen the public engagement effort from this point forward, because it will continue to be important for the study and for the community. So that's the first point I wanted to mention. The second point is that on the project website, there are some links there. There's actually a link to the new proposed final array of alternatives plan formulation tracker. I think it's currently still listed as a link to the management measures tracker, which was the previous version. But if you click that link, it is actually going to the new plan formulation tracker. So you can go to that website. It's honolulu.gov/alawai. And you can click that and you can go to that new tracker. What we'll be presenting today will explain in more detail what that tracker is actually showing you. And then the last thing that I just wanted to mention before we get into this is just sort of a preview of what you're going to see today. And when you hear me say the proposed final array of alternatives, kind of, what does that mean? Well, essentially, through the process of technical analysis and screening that we have been going through since July and even before then, we have, screened out some specific measures from, the long list of measures that we had. And some of those measures were cornerstones of alternative plans. And normally, when you screen that out, you would, in your next breath, you would then say, well, that alternative no longer has a cornerstone to rest on, so then we screen out that alternative as well. But, we felt like in the spirit of engagement and transparency that we have tried to follow here as part of this study, it felt a little bit wrong to us to do that. So we kind of are sort of pausing there before we take that next breath, so that we can share this with you guys. And so that's kind of what we mean when we say a proposed final array of alternatives. So those are just the things I wanted to get out of the way there as we get into this. So today's agenda, we are currently here in the introduction. We will then go to an update on the study progress, and that will include a discussion of the plan formulation tracker and the proposed final array of alternatives. Note that if you downloaded this slide deck from the website, it actually will say 75 minutes for that, or sorry, 45 minutes for that presentation and 75 for the breakout groups. That's kind of our target. but at the last second, I sort of changed it to this just because I looked at our presentation and I was kind of skeptical if we can make it in 45 minutes. So we'll see how, Eric and Cindy do. But they have a lot of information to convey to make sure that you guys understand what we have been up to. And then after the breakout group discussions, we will go to a large group discussion. And essentially what we'll do there is we'll report out the key themes and questions and concerns that people have in the breakout groups, because we'll want to make sure that everybody feels heard. And also it kind of helps us as a team to consolidate the things that we've heard as well. And then that will also give us a chance to answer some of those questions, the really important questions that that people have there. And then of course we'll do a wrap up. So it's sort of the usual suspects for our hosts and discussants today. The presenters and facilitators are mainly from the Army Corps of Engineers, and the discussants who will be floating around from group to group are largely from the city, although we have some other folks from the Corps here as well. So for the presentation part of this meeting, as usual, just if you have questions or comments, if you can put them in the chat, that would be great. Or if you want to hold them until we get to the breakout discussions, that works as well. Just please keep your audio on mute. And here's my email. I can put it in the chat as well. If anybody's having technical issues, you can, WebEx isn't working for you, you can certainly email me there. And in fact, I'll put my my mobile number so you can text me as well if you really need to. Okay, I'll do that in a second. So we're moving on now to the presentation, and I'll just kick that off. I just wanted to quickly review the community input that we've had thus far in terms of meetings and so forth. It really has been a critical part of this study and will continue to be so moving forward. We started with the scoping workshops in November of last year. We had an information forum in January, then we had detailed sub-basin workshops, and then the alternatives workshops in July for the initial array of alternatives. So that brings us to the December meeting. And also the little box down below shows, and I've showed this before, that a lot of, most of the management measures that we looked at had actually been suggested by the community, and we had received a lot of comments through our crowdsourced reporter application, lots of input through the email account and so forth. And again, there will be more opportunities for input to come. And certainly please continue to use the email and the website to stay in touch. So with that, I will hand it over to Cindy Akpal, our project manager from Honolulu.
Thank you, Tyson. Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us all here today. And so here on this slide, I will be going over the study process and the timeline. And so this study was initiated last June upon signing of a feasibility cost sharing agreement between the City and County of Honolulu, our sponsors, and the Army Corps of Engineers. And so since then, as Tyson mentioned previously, that we held our phase 1 public meetings last November, where we introduced this phase of the study and received initial input from the community. Then in January of this year, we held another meeting to provide a study update and to discuss our updated public engagement strategy, which really was based on feedback that we had received at the previous November meetings. Then in April of 2022, we held a series of 4 sub-basin workshops to go over management measures proposed both by the community and the technical team and the screening process of those management measures. Then in July, we held the first of the phase 2 meetings where we received public input on the initial array of alternatives. And then where we're at right now is where you see that double yellow arrow. Today's meeting is where you'll get to provide your input on the final array of alternatives. And so following this meeting, we'll release a draft report sometime next summer and follow that up with a phase 3 meetings to go over what we call the tentatively selected plan, which will be presented in that draft report. We will then hold phase 4 meetings to discuss the recommended plan ahead of release of the final report, and then a follow-up meeting after the release of the final report to discuss the remaining timeline and obtain another round of feedback. Then the study would be completed upon signing of a chief's report, which we anticipate to be sometime in the spring to summer of 2024. So about another year and a half or so until this study is complete. Next slide, please. And so as a review from our previous meetings, this study has 3 primary objectives: to reduce the risks to life and safety associated with direct inundation of structures, residential, non-residential, and critical facilities, and transportation infrastructure. To reduce economic damages associated with direct inundation of structures and public infrastructure, and then to reduce economic impacts associated with the disruption of commerce and tourism. And so we'll be coming back to those study objectives when we start talking about how we develop some of our management measures. Next slide, please.
And Cindy, I'm going to have to jump out of the slide deck here to show you guys this animation. Let me see here. Hold on just a second. Oops. Share screen. Okay, I'll play the slide for you and you guys can see this animation.
Hey, Tyson, before you click play, can I, oh, never mind, you've clicked play already. No problem.
Okay, I can go back. Do you want to set it up?
No, I just wanted, I know that there's some people who may not, this might be one of their first public meetings. And so I really wanted the opportunity to kind of get everyone's situation with the watershed itself. And it really, this is a beautiful flood animation. At our last public meeting in July, someone had asked the question, well, where's the flooding? And so we thought it might be easiest to kind of show you with one of these flood animations. And so you might have seen something similar. I believe we had shown something in the past, but that previous videos that we might have shown were specific to that 100-year event. And so what this animation will show you here is specific to the 2% annual exceedance probability, otherwise known as the 50-year flood event. And so this is the no action alternative, which we sometimes refer to as our future without project condition. And so for those of you not too familiar with this watershed, to the far left, we have Makiki Valley. And within that, you have the Kanaha Ditch, which converges with the Makiki Stream. And then in the middle, you have Manoa Valley with Manoa Stream running from essentially north to south. And then right where you see that massive bend, that horseshoe-shaped bend in the middle of Manoa Stream, that's where Woodlawn Bridge is located. And so much of the flooding you might have seen in that 2004 Manoa flood really stems from that area, that Woodlawn Bridge area. Then on the far right, you have Palolo Valley with Palolo Stream converging with the Manoa Stream, when it turns into then the Manoa Palolo drainage canal. And then that yellow line that you see going, I guess, kind of from left to right, that's our H1 freeway. And then if I were to now shift our focus to the areas below the H1 freeway, on the far west, the left of the Makiki Stream, that is the Ala Moana area. And then in that area in the middle between Makiki and Palolo Streams, that's the Makali Mo'ili'ili neighborhoods, where we oftentimes will refer to as the bottom of the bowl, simply because this is somewhat with the area where you see all the water from the watershed seems to collect and pond in this area. And then we have the area to the east of the Manoa Palolo, and that's the Kapahulu neighborhood. And then the area south of the Alawai Canal, as many of you are probably very familiar with, that's Waikiki. All right, now Tyson, go ahead and click play. Thanks.
All right. Okay. You want to say anything else on this? Oops. Hang on a sec. I'm going to go back to the slide deck. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. And so yeah, we were unable to post this video to the website simply because of its massive size. We tried transmitting the slide deck with the video embedded in it, and this is why Tyson kind of has to jump in and out of it. It's just because the video size is a little too large attached to the presentation. But we will try to get it up on the website somehow.
Yeah, and we have, I think we can also mention that we have a version of this for the 5% or 20-year flood event too, which if people are interested in, we could put that up there as well.
Yeah, and so this video really was, I mean, I think it's for some of you who live in the area and you're just curious, what is it that the Army Corps is really looking at in terms of flood models and animations, and I think the question really was asked at our last meeting, like show us, we can't imagine it, just show us, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to do here in providing some of these animations. But even from the animation, you can see specific areas within each of the watersheds, the subbasins, where it's projected to overtop, such as at the Woodlawn Bridge. And so really, our study team tried to focus on some of those specific areas when we were in the process of developing the management measures. And so if we can move on to the next slide, please. All right, so moving into the management measures. We started off with about 230 management measures, many of which were proposed by the community as well as a technical team. We then started the process of screening through those measures. And so we used the screening criteria listed here on this slide, such as, is it within the study authority? Is it technically feasible? And then to what extent would it reduce life risk and or economic damages? What is the expected cost effectiveness? And then what type of environmental effects could we expect out of it? And so here in this visual, you can see that we started with 230 management measures on the left, and then through our screening process, we were able to reduce that number down to about 50. And so from that, we were able to develop alternative plans. And so next slide, please. And so the plan formulation itself is a process of combining measures to make an array of plans or make an array of alternative plans that meet study objectives again. So going back to what I previously talked about, the study objectives, to reduce life and safety risk throughout the watershed, to reduce economic damages associated with flood and inundation, and then to reduce economic impacts to commerce and tourism. And so we then take these remaining measures, which meet those study objectives, and then we combine them into an array of alternative plans, which you can kind of see in the visual in the top, where you see a whole bunch of different shapes combined to make different plans. In this case, we took our 51 remaining management measures and combined them into an initial array of alternative plans, which we presented at our last meeting back in July. And then just due to the large number of management measures and possible combinations, it required a deliberate process to formulation. And that's where we discussed last time our cornerstone approach, where we identified various conveyance strategies, storage, nature and natural based, and then a hybrid plan as part of our initial array. And so then formulation itself is an iterative process with successive iterations increasing in detail. And so as we progress through the study, we did further analysis on that initial array. And so we were able to narrow down the focus while increasing the level of detail on each alternative plan. So today where we're at is at that bottom blue circle in the funnel, where we're presenting the final array of alternative plans. Next slide, please. All right, so as part of the evaluation process of alternative plans, we used the following evaluation criteria. So is it complete? Does it include all the actions necessary to meet study objectives without the need for other actions to achieve the desired effects? Is it acceptable? Is it consistent with laws, policies, and regulations? Is it efficient? And this is where we do a preliminary cost to benefit analysis. And is it effective from a life safety perspective? So to what level does it reduce inundation or water velocities and impacts to critical infrastructure such as hospitals, fire stations, shelters, as well as impacts to transportation infrastructure, so our roadways, like how quickly can our ambulances get from point A to point B? Then we also look at, is it effective from an economic perspective? So to what level does it reduce inundation or reduce damages? And then from a comprehensive benefits analysis, we look at both environmental effects and social considerations, and that's going to be from a qualitative standpoint as described here. Next slide, please. And so this here is an image of our management measure tracker that's up on the website. This is a tool that we developed, first of all, to track all the various management measures that were proposed and what each of those management measures entailed, you know, a description of them, as well as where they would be ideally implemented, and then a status as to where we were at in the analysis of each of those management measures. And so we've been using this tool to document the measures and key information related to each of the measures. We also use it to provide focused real-time feedback on the technical and planning process and where we are at within that process. But now that we have taken those management measures and assembled them into alternative plans, we are now transitioning away from this management measure tracker, which will be replaced with the plan formulation tracker, as Tyson mentioned earlier. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Eric, who will go into more detail about the plan formulation tracker and the final array of alternatives.
Great, thanks, Tyson. Thanks, Cindy. So I've been frantically trying to respond to folks in the chat. I love and appreciate during all these meetings the level of engagement and all the great questions. And so Tyson just said in the chat there have been a lot of great questions and comments about, you know, the specificity in some of the documents online, some of the assumptions that we've made, and I will do my best to address as many as I can and kind of the next bit of how we got to where we are. But again, you know, any outstanding questions or concerns that you have, even after this presentation, right, bring them to the great breakout groups, bring them to the subsequent kind of full room discussion. We want to make sure we adequately address the comments. So anyway, just want to say great, thanks. So as Cindy alluded to a moment ago, we transitioned the management measure tracker to what we're calling the plan formulation tracker. And so it's, you know, screened out a lot of the measures that were in the initial tracker. Now we're combining them into an array of alternatives. And we, you know, at the last meeting in July, we presented the initial array of alternatives. And so what this tracker does is it steps through each of the iterations in the plan formulation process for each of those alternatives and how they changed and why, and ultimately kind of arriving to the alternatives that we'll present today. Admittedly, we can't provide all of the data and all the analysis in that tracker. It would just be too much and too cumbersome, right? But we do have that information. We have all of the data that we use to screen these measures, and a much more thorough description will be provided in the report. But we're happy to talk about it here today as well. So the intent here is to share the latest array that we have, and I will say that I'll kind of walk through the tracker and hopefully a way that's a little easier to follow than just kind of walking through the tracker itself. But our intent is to update this, right? So as Tyson mentioned, this is the proposed final array. We will be optimizing, continuing as we move forward, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So these alternatives could change, and as they change, we'll continually update this plan formulation tracker as we move forward. So Tyson, next slide, please. So I'm going to be presenting off of maps today, as opposed to the table that's presented in the plan formulation tracker. And so what I'm going to do is each alternative, I'm going to step through the alternative that we presented in July, and then I'm going to walk through just another slide as to what may have been added, kind of hit some highlights, what may have been removed and why. And then ultimately, I'll show a third map of, all right, where are we today? And then we'll talk through the alternative as it is today and what the intent of the alternative and all the measures in that alternative is in terms of how we're reducing flood risk. So if there's an X, it means it was removed. If there was a green circle, it means it was added. And if there was a green circle and an X, it meant that it was added and then subsequently removed. So there's been, again, a lot of iterations for each of these. Next slide, please, Tyson. So again, I'm just going to kind of walk through this first one. So again, each of these alternatives, I'm going to show the alternative that we originally showed back in July, so the initial array, and then I'll step through how it has changed. And so again, alternative one was our storage cornerstone. So again, the cornerstone was kind of those pieces that we ultimately built the plan around. And so the cornerstones in the storage alternative were the Makiki District Park Detention and the associated flood wall that would help kind of route water. So the Kanaha flood wall would route water into that Makiki Park Detention Basin, the Manoa Valley District Park Detention Basin, as well as the Alawai Golf Course. So those were kind of the key cornerstones. And then from there, we built out, understanding what that would do to flood risk. We built out additional measures as needed to, in ways that we thought we would need to in order to reduce residual risk. And so you can see all of those additional pieces that kind of came into play here. We had a detention basin in Palolo, some flood walls down along the Alawai Canal and Kuali Road, and some measures at Woodlawn Bridge. And I remember, we had a lot of discussion at the last meeting about there's a lot of potential opportunities at the Woodlawn Bridge to reduce risk there. We had been trying various combinations of these, but we weren't quite sure yet. And so we had a lot of different options there. And so we've really kind of narrowed those down. Okay, so that's kind of the alternative that we presented in July. So then Tyson, step forward. So this next slide is a little bit busier, and I apologize about that. But what it does is it kind of steps through all of the iterations. So up at the top, it says, okay, there were 4 different iterations of this alternative that we ultimately went through and looked at and analyzed to ultimately end up where we got to today. And so just a few things that I want to highlight. I understand that it's busy, and again, all of this is in the plan formulation tracker, but I do want to highlight a few of the major changes. So the first one is, you can see down the bottom right-hand corner, we actually looked at adding a detention basin at the Kapiolani Park. What the intent was here is to add a tunnel, or not a tunnel, but like use existing infrastructure to pull water from the canal, store it in the Kapiolani Park, and then discharge it out to the ocean. Ultimately, we found out that measure was going to be too costly. We couldn't use gravity flow to get water there. We would need pumps. It would have to be very large. There were issues with the groundwater table. So for a lot of technical reasons, ultimately that was screened. So that was one that we added, thinking that it might work in an iteration, and then we ultimately screened. You can also see that there were a lot of measures, as I mentioned, up in Woodlawn, and ultimately we screened out a lot of those. And you'll see on the next slide that really we landed at the Manoa Valley District Park Detention Basin and a flood wall kind of right near the Woodlawn Bridge. Those two together kind of were the solution that best addressed the risk there at Woodlawn and prevented kind of water from jumping the banks. The other big piece, and Dave, you had in your email, one of your emails earlier, you had asked the question about, why was the flood wall screened from this alternative, but none of the others? And that's a great question. And you're right, it does seem inconsistent. But so what we did is we actually screened the flood wall from this alternative, because as we kind of started going through the iterations, when you had all the detention basins and you had the flood wall, essentially it became very similar to the hybrid alternative. And all of a sudden, we kind of lost the difference, the uniqueness between those two alternatives. And actually, at the last meeting, there was a concern raised. I remember it was, well, so most of these alternatives actually have a flood wall in them. Is that inevitable? And in reality, it's not necessarily inevitable. And so what we did is we removed the flood wall from this alternative, because it is true that, looking at storage alone could reduce risk, and it could ultimately be the most economically, or the most the optimal plan. Economically was not the right word. Optimal plan in that it, maximizes the benefits, whether they're economic, whether they're other social effects like life safety reductions, benefits to socially vulnerable communities, even though it may not necessarily protect against a storm. Protect isn't the right word. Reduce risk associated with a storm event that's very large, right? So maybe this plan would only reduce risk to a 10 or 20-year event, whereas a flood wall could reduce risk up to a 50-year event, right? But it doesn't matter. It could be the National Economic Development Plan, and that it's the plan that maximizes those benefits. And so we removed the flood wall to see what we could do without a flood wall, right? And so that's ultimately why we removed it from this alternative, to make a distinct alternative and to see, what we could do without, minimizing overall infrastructure and maximizing storage in the watershed. So I hope that makes sense. So there's just some key differences between and changes that we made. The other thing that I'll note, you'll kind of see throughout the remainder of these alternatives, is that up in Palolo, we had a very difficult time justifying a structural solution there. The damage is not as great in Palolo as it is in other areas of the watershed, and so from an economic perspective, from a life safety perspective, we just didn't have the benefits that we would need to justify a structural measure up there. And so you'll see in all of these, there is no structural measure proposed in the final array up in Palolo. I will also note that, and I'll mention it again as we go forward, we have not finalized the non-structural aspect of this plan development yet, so we're still looking at non-structural measures. Those are things like elevation of homes, flood-proofing of businesses, and so, we're still going to consider those in Palolo to the extent we can. Okay, so a lot of talking there. I just wanted to hit some highlights. So type the next slide. So the third step in this is the same alternative. It's still the storage cornerstone. So this is what is our proposed alternative for the final array. And it's what you see here, right? It's maximizing storage in the golf course, and the Makiki and the Manoa Valley District parks, and then a few flood walls to reduce risk at the Woodlawn Bridge along Kowali Road. And then we also have, it's not necessarily a flood wall, but it's a berm around the Kamuki High School. And what that does is it does allow a little bit of storage, but it also reduces flooding in kind of the neighborhoods just north of the Alawai Golf Course. And so again, this doesn't have a flood wall. We're trying to maximize storage and see what we can do with a solution that doesn't have a flood wall in it. Okay, so next alternative. So the next alternative that we presented at the last public meeting was one of the conveyance cornerstone alternatives, and this is the alternative that looked at bypasses and maximizing utilization of existing kind of storm drainage infrastructure. And so we had the Pi'ikoi bypass, the Woodlawn Drive bypass, culverts that took water from Palolo out to the ocean, culverts or tunnels that took, water from the canal underneath of Waikiki, and then ultimately also the Paki Avenue bypass that took water from the kind of east end of the canal out to the ocean. And so this is an alternative where, again, this is a little bit outside of the box. This was a lot of these measures had not been considered before under previous iterations of the study. Ultimately, these measures, were effective at kind of changing the hydraulics, but ultimately, the overall reduction in flood inundation depths and extents was not great enough to really justify the potential cost that these had. And so we were not going to get the benefits that we needed from an economic perspective, from a life safety perspective, they just weren't necessarily effective to the extent that we needed them to be. And so they were screened out. And again, there's been a lot of great questions about the data, right? So we don't see any data, we don't see any numbers. And when I say effective, what we did is we actually took all these measures and we modeled them, right? We put them into the hydraulic model and we predicted, what type of, how much they reduced water surface elevations under various events, right? And so at that point, you can see, are you changing the water surface elevations a lot? If the answer is yes, then you're going to have economic benefits. You're going to have life safety benefits. You're going to benefit, you're going to, have all sorts of benefits. But if it doesn't, then ultimately it's not effective and you can screen it out. So essentially that's what happened here. And so Tyson, you can go to the next slide. Essentially because of that, all of those various measures were not effective enough and we're not going to have the benefits that we needed. And so ultimately this alternative screened out, and as Tyson alluded to at the very beginning of the presentation, because all of the cornerstone pieces screened out. And so we're proposing screening of this alternative moving into the final array. Okay, so next slide, Tyson. Okay, so the next alternative was alternative 2B, and this was also a conveyance cornerstone, but instead of focusing on bypasses and existing infrastructure, it focused more on flood walls. So this was kind of our flood wall heavy alternative, where all the flood walls were a cornerstone. So the Kanaha flood wall, the Woodlawn Bridge flood wall, the Kawali Road flood wall, and the Alawai Canal flood wall. And then again, we built out measures around it. So we had some of the tunnels underneath of Waikiki and kind of the tunnel on the eastern end of the Alawai Canal to try to lower the height of those flood walls. Right, if we could expedite water exiting out of the canal through various other pathways, then maybe the flood wall wouldn't need to be as high. And so we did look at other measures as needed. And ultimately, so Tyson, so that was kind of the intent of the initial array of alternatives for this alternative. So move forward to the next slide, Tyson. We did go through 3 iterations of this alternative. Ultimately, a lot of those kind of secondary alternatives were screened out. So again, as I mentioned before, the Waikiki bypass, so some of those bypasses underneath of Waikiki and kind of the tunnel on the east outlet end, those were all screened. They were not effective. We also looked at dredging kind of in conjunction. So if we could, increase maybe the depth of the canal or increase the depth of the Manoa-Palolo Canal, Manoa-Palolo Canal, and maybe we could reduce the height of the flood walls. Ultimately, that was screened out as well. We also, again, looked at the up in Woodlawn Bridge. So we have the flood wall. We looked at adding in a couple other measures. Specifically here, we're calling out the Woodlawn bypass. And ultimately, again, the Woodlawn bypass we found out wasn't really necessary if you have the flood wall there, and the flood wall was kind of a more effective way at preventing water from jumping the bank there. And so ultimately we added it, and then the bypass, but then screened it back out. And then we did add in, the only other thing to note here is we did add in the Makiki Valley District Park here, because it does function in coordination with the Kanaha flood wall. So if you have a flood wall along the Kanaha ditch, effectively you're keeping water in the channel. And so that's just additional water that would flow down through the channel through Makiki. If you can add in the Makiki Valley District Park there, again, you're able to store some of that water as well as store some of the additional water that's coming down throughout the watershed. And so it just is another great measure that we added in that ultimately did get retained into the final alternative for this alternative. Okay, so moving forward, Tyson. So this is what all the flood wall alternative kind of ultimately turned into after all of the iterations of this alternative. And it really is essentially a flood wall heavy alternative, right? We have flood walls at Kanaha, Woodlawn, Kawali Road, and then we have the flood wall system around the canal. I want to make a note here that we have number 6 there is drainage structures. And so right now in our modeling, there's been a lot of talk about pumps throughout the course of these meetings right now. And these alternatives and through the modeling runs that we've done, right now we're not showing that we need any pumps. What we're looking at having here are more flap gates. And and I was meant, so Sydney, you asked a question earlier about the height of the flood walls, and I told myself on the first flood wall alternative I was going to talk about that, and I didn't. So I think right now is an okay place. So for all of these alternatives, the flood walls are assumed to be the same height. So we made some assumptions whenever we started going in and looking at this final array, because again, we're just trying to develop these plans so they can be compared against one another. And so essentially what we did is we assumed flood wall heights currently of about 6 feet. And there's a number of reasons why we did that. One is that it kind of hits that sweet spot of the 20 to 50 year event, right? So we've talked a lot about in the previous studies where, we're the third go around at looking at this, right? The first two efforts ultimately landed at the 100-year event, and they were unable to find a justifiable project at the 100-year event. And so we went and used their data from those studies and the benefits they had calculated and the cost for a lot of things. And we found out that really, kind of more realistically speaking, the 20 to 50-year event is probably that optimal event where we're going to be able to maximize benefits while minimizing cost, right? And again, not just economic benefits, we're talking life safety benefits as well, and other social benefits. And so again, we made that assumption of about 6 feet because that gets us around the canal to that kind of, I'll say, sweet spot of 20 to 50 year event. That does not mean that ultimately the final plan will be 6 feet walls. We will have to optimize. So when we find the recommended plan after we compare them together, we will do what we call optimization, and we'll go in and we'll start adjusting the height of the flood wall, looking at how that adjusts the cost, how that adjusts the benefits, and we'll try to really hone in on what that exact height is. Another thing I want people to consider here is that when we say 6 feet flood wall, that can be done in various ways, right? So it could be a 6 foot wall, or it could be, there are ways that we can, work with the sponsor there. We could look at something like a 3 foot walking path and a 3 foot wall on top of that, right? Or you can look at berms in certain areas. And so there are ways that, that we can minimize the impact of that wall on the community and the social, other social effects that it may have, the impacts of the viewshed. And so, again, none of those things have necessarily been considered right now. We've really been looking at what works and where does it work. And that kind of level of detailed optimization comes into play a little bit later. But those are all things that we are and will continue to actively consider as to how we can work with the community to make sure that these solutions are the least impactful. The other thing I do want to note is, and I know I missed my opportunity, but so talking numbers, the storage alternative between the 3 storage areas, so the Alawai Golf Course, the Manoa Valley District Park, and the Makiki District Park, I think have a combined total of about 400 acre feet of storage. And so what that means, an acre foot is essentially 1 foot of water covering an entire acre. So that's kind of what that means. And so 400 acre feet of water is what we're looking at being able to store in those 3 storage areas. And so, we do have the numbers, we do have the analyses. It's a lot to present. It's a lot to present in that table, but it will all be presented in the draft report. And so I don't want you to think that, this is or will continue to be executed in a black box, right? We want to be transparent with all of that information as well. The other thing I'll note, and there was a question about the designs for this storage alternative. So, how might it impact the parks themselves? Really, the storage for that comes because of excavation. So what we would be doing is excavating down in those parks to increase the storage. There may be some type of wall or berm on the edge, but again, we're excavating down to try to minimize kind of the height of a wall. So you're trying to, get storage by excavating. The intent would be to excavate and then have it be maintained as a park, right? And so in reality, it would still be able to be used as a park. We would try to work to make sure that all the existing uses are maintained, and it would only be utilized under these more severe extreme events like the 20 or 50 year event. That's the only time it would be triggered and used as a detention basin. And so in reality, the impact of the community would be fairly minimal because you wouldn't expect, the detention basins to be utilized very often, maybe once every 20 years on average, once every 50 years on average, something like that. But we can get a little bit more into detail on the designs as we move forward. So I'm trying to answer some of these questions, Cindy, that you had asked and others were asking, and they're great, right? We do have that information. We're trying to get to that level of detail. Okay, sorry, took a detour there, Tyson.
No worries. Where did you land before? Let's see. Was it
Back.
back?
There, no, back. I finished on the flood wall.
Flood wall. Wait. Okay, I'm just going to step through it. Okay, conveyance.
All right, stop.
Stop here.
Back one more. Okay, that's right. So the next alternative, the third conveyance, I'm sorry. I just had forgotten to say some of that stuff, and I just wanted to make sure I had it while it was on the tip of my mind. So the next alternative was UC, so, and it was also a conveyance alternative, and it focused on the second outlet. I know the second outlet, has been proposed in other study efforts as well, but we wanted to take a look at it again with kind of our unique spin on it. And so again, the second outlet is a daylit, meaning it's an open outlet on the eastern end of the canal. The team modeled that, meaning that we simulated implementation through our models and to see how that it would affect the hydraulics. And unsurprisingly, it did reduce water surface elevations to some extent. However, we also started developing costs for that alternative. We started looking at, okay, what are the excavation costs? What are the costs to construct new walls along that canal? And so forth. What are the real estate costs, right? What about bridges that need to be put over the canal? And so all of these things started, adding up, and it became clear that the costs were going to be too great to justify the benefits that we were getting from an economic perspective and a life safety perspective, and especially while considering some of the other measures that are on the table that would be equally as effective at far less cost. And so we took this alternative as far as we could. We started developing costs for it. We modeled it, and ultimately we just couldn't get there. And so that the second outlet was ultimately screened. And so because that was the only cornerstone in this alternative, and because that cornerstone screened, ultimately we're proposing removal of this alternative from the final array. And so that's all the next slide shows, just a big kind of note that we'll be screening this likely moving forward. And the other thing I would like to mention here is, so we considered costs. We developed costs, preliminary costs. We looked at preliminary benefits, reductions in water surface elevations, potential damages. The other thing we considered is we talked a lot about this alternative with through the environmental coordination process, right? There are significant environmental concerns with a large scale outlet like that would be essentially, causing water to be pumping out of the canal 100% of the time. That's a national marine sanctuary right there. And so, critically preserved habitats from a marine standpoint, as well as other things, right? And so also environmental effects come into play when we start talking about screening. And Dr. Minervi asked that question earlier in the chat, and others were asking, how are environmental considerations incorporated into the screening criteria? And they absolutely are. And especially with respect to a lot of these measures that were essentially secondary or additional outlets directly to the ocean. Those had some of the greatest environmental impacts and resulted in the greatest environmental concern from our partnering environmental agencies and others. And so, environmental considerations absolutely were included in screening criteria, and they will absolutely be incorporated into evaluation and comparison criteria moving forward. That might be, Dr. Minervi asked a lot of great questions about metrics too, right? And so some of that, some of these will be quantitative metrics, but sometimes it might be more qualitative in terms of the number of stream miles that are impacted or that are benefited, or whatever it may be. But there will be metrics that kind of drill down into what those effects are, we can absolutely share those. If we don't get into it today, we can share those online as we start getting into the evaluation and comparison process, probably in the plan form tracker. Okay, sorry, I keep going down tangents, just trying to answer questions as I move.
It's all good.
Okay, so alternative 3, am I talking too long, Tyson? Do I need to hurry up?
I think we're okay.
Okay.
Let me just check here. So you're on slide 27, and the presentation goes through 34 in terms of the description of the alternatives.
Okay. All right, we're doing all right. Okay. So the next alternative was the tunnel cornerstone, and I know the tunnel, tunnels have been discussed a lot, right? This study, previous iterations, and so, we really wanted to chase this one down as far as we could, right? And so this is the initial alternative that we presented at the meeting in July. It had the 3 tunnels, one in Makiki, and the 2 swift tunnels that were looked at, one in Manoa and one in Palolo. And then we understood that we would not be able to reduce risk 100% along the canal area, even if we were able to implement those tunnels. And so we said we'd likely still need a flood wall, at some height around the Alawai Canal to reduce risk kind of to the lower watershed. And so really that's, and also in Manoa, up in the Woodlawn Bridge area, we thought we would need something at the Woodlawn Bridge area, so we had a flood wall there as well. So next slide, Tyson. What we did is we updated the costs from the last iteration in terms of the times that these tunnels were looked at. We updated the cost. We updated the H&H modeling, right? We actually put these models in the model and looked at what they did and how much they lowered water surface elevations upstream as well as down the canal. So we did a full analysis, and we went through 6 iterations of this alternative, trying to look at combinations of tunnels, adding additional measures in like storage areas at the golf course, additional bypasses like the P. Koi bypass. And so we really tried to look at all iterations that we thought would be possible to try to reduce costs of the overall tunnels, not reduce costs of the tunnels, but maybe minimize, maybe look at 1 tunnel and some other measures, 2 tunnels and pulling other measures in, right? But ultimately, through those iterations, we weren't able to identify a plan that would essentially be cost effective, right? And again, when we talk about benefits, it's not just economics, it's also life safety and others as well, right? So yes, they altered hydrology and altered hydraulics, but not to the extent that we'd be able to justify the cost of those alternatives. And I will say that the cost of the alternatives, so the last iteration, did not incorporate things like real estate, construction management, cost for planning, engineering, and design, right? So all of these things we added into the cost, and that just increased the cost to the point that the tunnels were not going to be justified, any one of them individually or all of them combined, or any combination thereof. And so because of that, ultimately, this alternative was screened, or we're proposing to screen this alternative from the final array. Okay, Tyson. Yeah. So this is one I'm sure we'll want to talk a lot about today, right? So the natural and nature-based alternative. Again, the cornerstone here was watershed management. And we talk about watershed management, it's, invasive control, reforestation with native species, even in terms of, these more green solutions, like low ecolo, farming throughout the watershed, right? So those were kind of the cornerstones. And then beyond that, honestly, at the time, we didn't really know exactly what that was going to do. And so we just kind of said it might be that and any combination of other things. And so there's a lot going on here. But the primary driver here in terms of the next step for us was to really dive in and take a look at, what those watershed management actions might actually do hydrologically and hydraulically. And so that's what our team did, right? We took our models, we ran a bunch of sensitivity analyses, we looked at reforestation, we looked at invasive management, we went through, a bunch of different analyses, and ultimately at the end of the day, our results showed that these measures did change the hydrology, right? So no surprise there, right? There's been other studies that looked at this. We expect these measures to have an effect on rainfall runoff, infiltration. So they do have an effect, and so, they represent a viable measure. Unfortunately, what we found is that really they only have an effect at the very, very frequent events. So like the 1 year, maybe the 2 year, but not even consistently at events like the 2 year event. So we're saying an event that happens every year on average or every 2 years on average. And so we do have effect on hydrology at those events, but not at the greater events. So when I say greater, things like the 10-year event, the 20-year event, the 50-year event. So think about, like the 2004 flood up in Manoa, right? Those types of events, there's no real measurable effect on the hydrology in terms of the amount of water coming down at those events. And those events are really what's driving risk within this watershed. And so because forest management is not really having an effect on those events that are driving risk, ultimately, we could not carry them forward because that's, we're tasked with reducing flood risk tasked with reducing flood risk. And although they do have an effect on hydrology, they ultimately do not reduce that risk at the events that are causing that risk. And so, again, there were questions about can we share the analysis and the results, and the answer is absolutely yes. We have detailed analyses and detailed write-ups of results that are being reviewed right now, and so we can share those. They will be shared with the draft report, if not sooner, right? We can most likely share those sooner. But because of that, and I understand this is not ideal news, right? I know that, and me as a little background on me, I'm a river and stream ecologist, right? And so these types of measures are also near and dear to my heart. But within kind of the confines and the processes and the policy and the guidance that we have to follow, ultimately these types of measures within this study, it appears that they will not be able to be implemented as part of this project. And so we're proposing to screen it out. The only other thing I'll say here, and I know we've said this many times, is that our study and our project and your recommendation is only one piece of the puzzle, right, in terms of how to effectively manage the Alawai watershed. And so, we can address what we can address with our puzzle piece. We can't fill in other puzzle pieces, but there are other puzzle pieces that can fill those spaces in, right? And even though we cannot do that, there are other avenues that can be pursued to fill those puzzle pieces in. And so, I think if there's one piece of good news is that, although we cannot, address those issues with a recommendation out of our study, our analyses are also showing that any recommendation subsequent to ours, so say we implement a project and there, forest management happens in the future, that will not kind of negate anything that our study does, right? Because again, our study will be looking at risk and issues that are caused by these less frequent, 10, 20, 50-year events. And so, that work will not kind of counteract anything that we're doing and vice versa, right? They'll together kind of more holistically, at the end of the day, work together to increase resiliency of the watershed. So that's kind of where we landed on that. And I know we'll talk more about this moving forward into the work groups this afternoon, this evening. So I'll say Tyson, next slide. So alternative 5 is the hybrid cornerstone. And again, this is one where we didn't necessarily focus on storage, or we didn't focus on conveyance or tunnels. We said, okay, well, no matter what the type of alternative is, what do we think would be most effective? And so we picked the Manoa Valley District Park detention, the Woodlawn Drive bypass, and the Alawai Canal flood wall. So it kind of, storage and conveyance and flood walls combined. And then, so Tyson, go ahead and go to the next slide. So, we did run through 4 iterations of this as well. And just some big highlights here. Again, when we start talking about Makiki, ultimately we landed on looking at the Kanaha and the Makiki District Detention Park there is kind of the solution, or, proposed solution for Makiki. Up in Manoa, again, we had a lot of different things we were looking at, similar to some of the other alternatives. We really landed on ultimately the detention basin and the flood wall. And then the other big thing to note here is that, we added the Alawai golf course detention. So instead of the golf course just kind of being a floodplain, we maximize storage within the golf course by excavation, kind of creating some berms, so trying to maximize the storage capacity of the golf course there. So again, it really is kind of combining both storage and kind of the flood wall type conveyance solutions. And so in essence, is a good hybrid plan for both of those kind of types of solutions moving forward. I think that's all I was going to mention here. So yeah, the final hybrid alternative again is the detention facilities at the golf course and the Kiki and the Manoa, as well as kind of the flood walls at Woodlawn Bridge to prevent water from jumping back there at Woodlawn, as well as the Kanaha flood wall to help kind of funnel water, and then the Kiki storage area, and then ultimately the flood walls at Kauai Road and around the Alawai Canal. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I understand that, and it's, I don't expect it all to be absorbed immediately. We have the plan form tracker online that can be looked at. I understand that, there are some measures that a lot of folks were passionate about that appear like they will be screened out moving into the final array. I keep going back to the last public meeting, and I think Tyson had this. The last thing I'll say, Tyson. Oh, actually, you know what? Well, yeah, I'll say this now. I have 2 more slides. I'm sorry. Tyson had a survey, right? And it was like, okay, which of these alternatives do you prefer? Which do you not prefer? And by far and large, I think that the natural and nature-based solution was the preferred alternative. I think it got like 19 scored preferred, but not too far behind that were the hybrid alternatives, which I think had 16 folks say, okay, this one's not too bad. And then also the storage alternatives, right? And so, I think that, there's some positive news here in that, we are seeking solutions that, may be less impactful, right? They, even though it's not necessarily as green as something like watershed management, storage in the watershed is a greener solution because it, maximizes infiltration, which has benefits on water quality, and all sorts of other things, right? So I do think that, hopefully through this process, we're finding solutions that, folks can get behind, I guess I'll say. So, okay, Tyson, move on to the next slide. So again, Tyson mentioned what the proposed final array is, really. So, moving forward, what are we going to do? Essentially, the final array of alternatives are the alternatives that we'll essentially evaluate and compare among each other. We'll do so with the metrics and the criteria that I talked a little bit about during my presentation. And Dr. Minervi, to your point, we can absolutely provide a detailed list of what those are and how we're using them as we move forward. And then how final is it, right? I mentioned that we keep using the proposed final array. There will be changes to this, and we will be tracking those changes in Plan Form Tracker. One of the big changes will be making sure that non-structural measures are appropriately considered. And so, we wouldn't necessarily expect the alternatives to change too much from what they are now, but we will make sure that we consider non-structural measures in place of or in addition to some of the measures in these alternatives, right? So I use the example of the Kauai Road flood wall. It's a challenging space. There's not a lot of real estate there. It might be an expensive solution, whereas we might be able to go in and elevate some of those homes in that area or in other similar areas, and ultimately that is less costly and reduces risk, especially things like life safety risk, in a better way. And so we will be looking at non-structural measures, and so we could expect the alternatives to change a little bit in that regard, but no major changes. And then finally, just one note here is once something is screened out, it does have a higher bar of coming back in, right? Because generally speaking, measures have been screened out because they were found to be ineffective, and ultimately we have to be effective at reducing flood risk. And when I say effectiveness, it's really, are we reducing damages? Are we reducing life safety risk? If the answer is no, then it's a really high bar to get that put back in. And so I'll just leave that there. And I think that's it, Tyson, for me.
You've actually got one more, but before I move you to the next slide, I just want to, Sydney asked to help clarify again what non-structural measures are. So I just wanted to mention that that in Corps of Engineers lingo, the difference between structural and non-structural is structural are those things that actually like change the flow of the floodwaters themselves in some way, right? Like a dam or a levee or something like that that actually stops or moves those floodwaters in some way, whereas a non-structural measure would be something that sort of gets the people or the things that are under threat out of the way of danger, essentially. So elevating the homes, flood-proofing the homes, and relocation in cases where that's needed. So it's sort of counterintuitive because some of those non-structural measures are actually quite intensively structural in terms of like affecting buildings and things. But that's the core of engineers lingo for you. So yeah, glad you asked that question, Sydney, because it needed to be clarified. And I'll move you to the next slide.
Okay.
Eric.
All right. So yeah, I had already kind of talked about the cornerstone strategy at the top already, so I won't go through that again. But essentially, it just kind of sums up what we presented as the initial array of alternatives, right? So we had all of those listed on the left, and ultimately, we're kind of now to a much more refined, proposed final array of these alternatives, with kind of the understanding that they might change a little bit, especially with non-structural measures. And so I do think, Tyson, before I pass the ball, and this kind of gets into the discussion a little bit, I just saw a comment. Again, I know I've missed a lot, but it kind of comes back to something I said about, the level of protection that we're striving for. And yeah, we have said all along and through this entire process, we've looked at, the 100-year, we've looked at the 20, we've looked at the 50, we've made some assumptions identifying where we think the sweet spot is. But I did say that, during the 2-year event, right, we don't really have risk. And so we can't really implement something that does have a benefit at the 2-year event. And so the reason we can't do that, and I understand the point that, it looks like we're prejudging, right? We are making some predetermination that we're not looking at that 1 to 2 year event. And that's not necessarily true, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to justify a project based off of benefits. And those benefits are things like reductions in life safety risks. So, flooded roadways, damages to homes, direct risk to folks that might be around the stream, as well as damage to homes and businesses. And those 1 to 2 year events are not the drivers of those risks, right? They are not the events that are causing the damage. They're not the events that are causing the life safety risk. And so we can't capture benefits at those events. And so we can't implement solutions that only change flooding at those events because we're not effectively reducing any risk. And I understand the point that, debris, and that kind of brought up debris, right? So debris, that some of those events may wash debris down into the channel, and that's absolutely true, right? But also, I think it's worth noting that, the great example is Woodlawn, right? There's those photos of Woodlawn Bridge having lots of debris build up, and I understand that's a problem, and that I'm not saying it's not. But even without kind of that debris necessarily being implemented into our model is still showing Woodlawn Bridge overtopping at those events, right? And so understand that exacerbates the issue, and that in and of itself is a risk. But for us to effectively reduce that risk of the debris, right, we need to kind of look at those higher events, right? So even if we could prevent debris from being in the stream, I guess my point is, if I can say it a little bit more coherently, even if we prevented debris from entering the stream, we would still have risk from like Woodlawn Bridge overtopping, running down and through the university, down into Macaulay, Ely, right into those areas, even without the debris. And so we cannot justify implementing a solution that doesn't fully address the problem if it doesn't reduce ultimately the risks that we have to reduce. And so I just wanted to say that, and again, I know there will be further discussion, but that was a great question, and just want to be as transparent as possible. And I thought that was an important one to say because I know everybody's interested in that topic that's on the call today. Over.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, we'll definitely have further discussion on that, and we are heading into our breakout groups soon here. So here's who will be your facilitators. We'll have the three groups, and Vera will be in the main room. Kelly and I will be in breakout group 1. Eric and Kendall, public involvement specialists, will be in breakout group 2, and Cindy and Zach will be in breakout group 3. Those will be your facilitators. So it says here, again, 75 minutes. I'm not sure if we have quite that much time, but let's see. How are we on time, actually? We're pretty much on time. So I think, anyway, we'll start with 60, and if we want to go a little bit longer, maybe we can. But I want to, before we get to that, I've got another little poll that, like the one that we ran in July. And so I want to, I'm just going to open that up for everybody here. Okay. Okay, so I've opened this poll where you can answer these questions. What's your overall reaction to this proposed final array? Those are your choices. You can just select, just your overall sense reaction to those. And then the next two questions, if you scroll down in the poll, of the alternatives remaining, which do you prefer? And then which alternatives give you the most pause? So those two are the same as the questions we asked in July. Great, people are answering the questions. And I'll give you guys a couple minutes to look through these and answer them. Okay. So a few more folks who are still working on it. Just give it a little more time. All right. Okay. I'll close the poll in 5 seconds. Okay. Let's try that again. Okay, it's giving you guys automatically giving you an extra 15 seconds. So just to finish whatever you're working on. And there we are. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see the results of the poll now. They're on the right. Hang on a sec. I have to share it with you. There we go. So hopefully you guys can see it now. Looks like, overall reaction is kind of C and D is where most people cluster. That's kind of, I think, what we expected, but it's, good to have confirmation. And there are some concerns. There are some potential, need some work. Let's see, of the alternatives remaining, looks like, hybrid is slightly preferred over any others. And the ones that give people the most pause is primarily the flood wall, although some other votes for other ones as well. So thank you guys for that. That's helpful for us. Before we, excuse me, before we head into the discussion, just a quick prompt for you. What do you want us to know? I mean, I'm sure that there are going to be questions and comments on the array, and that's great. Let's definitely talk about that. But also, we want to know what we should know. What do you think we need to know, and what do we need to consider that maybe you feel like we're not considering, or maybe something that you feel like we don't know as we begin this process of comparing the alternatives and working toward that tentatively selected plan. So this would be a good opportunity to discuss that. And finally, our ground rules for these groups. If you can put your comments and questions in the chat, or you can use the raise hand tool. Keep your audio on mute unless you are speaking. The first time that you talk, if you can introduce yourself. And of course, as always, be conscious of acronyms and technical language. And please make sure that everybody has a chance to speak, so try not to speak too long. And then of course, you can always contact us later. So I'm going to start our breakout sessions here. Let's see, we've got 3 sessions, and it will assign folks automatically. And do reach out to me if you have any issues with this, but here we go. Start. Okay, so hosts and co-hosts, you should see under the participant list, there's a breakout sessions button. You can click that, and then you can join whichever one you like, or whichever one you're assigned to. Luciana, I see you here in the main room. I'm not sure why you haven't been assigned automatically, but you should also be able to join a room if you like. And if not, then you can hang out here in the main room and chat with Vera and whoever else is here.
Great. Thanks, Tyson. Aloha mai kako. My name is Vera Cascalo. I'm the Honolulu District Public Involvement Specialist, and I'm one of the co-facilitators this evening. And so where we are now, we are entering breakout groups, and we are talking through the alternatives remaining in the proposed final array as far as which ones are preferred, which ones give pause, and other aspects that folks would like to let the core know. So before we get started, anybody in the main room trying to join a big breakout group and needs help, if you could raise your hand either on your camera, and I can try and help. Yeah, Luciana? Okay. See if I can help move you.
I don't know where I am. I was told that I am in the main room. Oh, join.
Yeah, you're here with me. And, oh, yes. So if folks, on your right-hand side of your screen, if you're looking under participants, you should be able to click on breakout sessions, and you should see 3 different sessions. And on the right-hand side of those, you should be able to click join. Okay. Anybody else still having a hard time and needs help? Okay. If anybody else needs help, I've got my chat open, so you can either just chat to me directly or chat to everybody, and I'll try and help. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to share the poll and discussion prompts. Okay. So hopefully folks can see. It's a little small, so I'll try and make this a little bigger. There we go. So our conversation is now going to be about these last three questions. We just did a poll of this first bit. And so we're discussing of the alternatives remaining in the proposed final array, which do you prefer? Which alternatives give you the most pause? And what do you want us to know and consider as we begin the process of comparing alternatives and working toward a tentatively selected plan? So just as like a little refresh, I will bring up the slides with the final array so we can refresh our memories and have our conversation. Okay. So I'm just going to give folks a chance to look at that for a minute, and then we will kick off our conversation. Let me see if I can make these a little bigger. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see some faces here. All right. And let's see if these folks are in this main room here. Okay. So looking back to the chat. And so kind of working backwards, it sounds like maybe we're starting with some stuff that you want to make sure that the team's aware of. And so I'm seeing the biggest issue is that the solution does not address the pollution in the Alloy Canal. So thank you, Paul, for bringing that up. That's an important factor. Before that, we heard from Ken regarding, so just reading this out loud, just because UH has been able to mostly flood-proof the infrastructure on campus. Regarding what Eric said, that even without removing the source of the debris that caused the 2004 flood event, the water would still come over the top and cause the same kind of catastrophic damage to those individual homeowners and to other commercial property will occur unless everyone did the same kind of flood-proofing that UH did for their campus. So it sounds like that's a question about a little bit more detail about the kind of flood-proofing that UH did for their campus and what would be required to provide similar protection elsewhere. So thank you, Ken. Again, maybe it's easier to work backwards. Anything that y'all want the team to know? Anybody who's new and has this, new to some of this engagement and has any specific questions, or anything that you wanted to hear about but didn't hear about during our earlier presentation? Gonna pause for some thoughts.
I wanted to hear why the drainage ditches were not included in the flood study.
So Thank you, Glenn. When you're talking about the flood study, are you talking about this final array, or are you talking about like provide a little more background on the drainage ditches?
Yes, in 2004 in Manoa Valley, the Woodlawn ditch flooded our house right where it enters Manoa Stream. It overflowed right at the junction and overflowed right at the ditch into a whole block of homes all the way down to Kahaloa Drive. So we had like in our driveway, we had like 1 to 2 feet of muddy brown water coming down late in the evening. Now, you folks are doing this flood slide, which is good and fine, but you're not including all of the pieces of the puzzle, because the ditch in our area, the ditch was once a stream, which has now been allocated to a ditch. And whenever there's a heavy rain, the so-called ditch becomes a raging stream going into Manoa Stream, and it's like two streams trying to go into one place, and it causes the stream to overflow and just floods wherever it wants, basically. And it has nothing to do with Hamilton Library.
Thank you, Glenn. Just to make sure I understand, it sounds like the concern is about the capacity and the volume of streams like Manoa Stream, and
right.
That what I hear you saying is the proposed fixes don't seem to address some of the flooding from the stream overflow. Did I get that comment correct?
Yes, and the only thing I see that might somewhat help us, which I kind of doubt, would be the Manoa Valley District Park portion of the project, which you're going to use it as a detention basin, which is downstream from our location. And I really don't know if that's going to really help us that much. I know during 2004, the Kahaloa Bridge became like a little dam, and anything that's down past Kahaloa Bridge, which is Manoa Valley District Park, doesn't really help us. So I'm not too sure if that's going to help us in any way. Now, when you do a study by looking at, let's say, the FEMA flood maps, that doesn't show anything about the ditches potential to flood. And I've seen other studies where in 2004, Alani Drive flooded along the Woodlawn Ditch. And it was a really bad flood over there, but no one's talking about it.
Thank you for that input, Glenn. So we also, while you were providing that comment, we got a little bit of chat from Rhiannon Kucharski, the Civil and Public Works Chief from the Honolulu District. She was recommending it if, of course, we hate to lose you, but Breakout Group 1 has the project delivery team technical lead talking a little bit about why some options within the alternatives were selected to move forward and why some other ones were not. So if you're interested, we can try and hook you up with that first breakout group. And just to make sure that, yeah?
Yeah, if anyone's willing to listen, yeah, I'll talk to anybody. I've tried to talk to Army Corps of Engineers during their first and second iterations of the project, and no one wanted to listen to me.
I'm really sorry about that, Glenn. I know that can really feel frustrating to feel like your comments aren't being heard. At least for this session, and I believe for the last rounds of public engagement done primarily over the web, and then there was also that in-person one for this project. All the comments are being taken down in notes. The session, not the breakout groups, so that's why I'm also taking notes, but the main large group discussions are also being recorded. So just to kind of close the loop on this last comment, not only is the concern about the volume kind of capacity of these streams, but also the concern would be that the detention basin in Manoa wouldn't address flooding for residents that are located farther Mauka. Did I get that right?
That's absolutely correct. In particular, where the Woodlawn Ditch feeds into Manoa Stream specifically. Now, there's a project that that you may have heard that's being planned for part of the Woodlawn Ditch, and I'm really concerned about that. It's called the Manoa Banyan Court Project. That's planned by the Chinese cemetery, and I really have really heavy concerns about what's going to happen if they go ahead with this housing project in that area without really thought or consideration to how the ditch is going to be affected, because the buildings are going to be like 5 to 10 feet away from the ditch itself, and I'm not really sure they have really talked to the community about that, and I'm really concerned about it.
Thank you, Glenn. I've got that down as, so there's some concern about other projects that may be happening in the meantime as we're having these conversations, like the Manoa Banyan Park housing project and how that'll impact flooding as well. So to make sure that the team is factoring that in when looking at potential alternatives. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. And I do understand that the mitigation projects from Manoa Stream will not in particular help our area. I've been told in the past projects for LOI flood control project that it would not help us if there's a 100-year flood. So there would be a flood in our area one way or another. It's just the potential of how bad the flood's going to be, and so I'm trying to reduce the as much as possible the potential of flood damage in our area as much as possible. So, like it or not, I know it's going to flood. It's just how bad it's going to be.
Yeah, thank you for that, Glenn. And I'm sure the other residents of Upper Manoa appreciate you being an advocate. So thank you for that input. Anything else before we go to our next person? Oh, and sorry, I just saw this now. Rhiannon, I see you've got your hand up. Did you want to respond to some comments that we've had so far? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Vera. Thank you so much, Glenn, for that feedback. So I don't know the specifics of where your house is located in relation to the flood maps, but I will say that if we don't have a structural measure that's reducing flood risk in an area, then that's a great candidate area for non-structural solutions, and that is included in the final array of alternatives. So we would be looking at a voluntary program at homes and businesses for people to elect in for floodproofing of their structure. And so that might be a possibility if there isn't a physical structure that's able to efficiently reduce the risk in your neighborhood. So I would definitely connect with Kelly, who is the technical lead. She's in charge of the modeling in terms of what's in the modeling, the assumptions, working through the modeling and the results. And so maybe she can help identify kind of where your neighborhood and your home is specifically within that model, and confirm whether or not that ditch is included. In general, we have a rule in law that for a stream or water body to be included in our projects, it has to have at least 800 cubic feet per second of flow in it. If it is below that, we are not supposed to include it in a Corps of Engineers project based on the law. So I'm not sure if that ditch is above or below that threshold. But Kelly should be able to get you specific information for your neighborhood as well as your home, Glenn.
Well, it's not a stream per se. I mean, there's not water coming down every day, but when there's a heavy rain event like they had earlier this year, I think in January, they had a heavy rain 24 hours that almost caused another flood. Those are the times I'm really concerned about. It's not like a babbling brook coming down the ditch, but it's when the stream becomes a raging river coming down, coming down into our neighborhood is when I'm really concerned about.
Yes, that's understandable. And I think there are rules for ephemeral areas, ephemeral meaning it only flows sometimes. So I would just say if you're willing to share either your address or if you're willing to share maybe a kind of a drawing or a polygon around your neighborhood so we can give that to Kelly and get some specific information for you. I think that would be a great follow-up from today to make sure that your voice is heard and that we get you the information that you're looking for.
Okay. Well, you folks have my email address, so unless you want it again.
No, I mean your physical address. We can locate your home in the model on the map, but I don't want you to share that with this whole group. So Vera, if we can just take an action, and the action officer would be Kelly, for us to follow up with Glenn to get the location of his home, the ditch that he's referring to, and the general polygon of the neighborhood of concern. So we can identify the assumptions, what is in the model in that vicinity, and make sure that we can get Glenn answers to his questions.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Rhiannon. I know we've got some other folks in the main meeting room with us this evening. Does anybody else want to share some thoughts? Again, where our two questions that we've got to kind of get conversation going is any aspects of the final proposed array that are that you're particularly in favor of, any aspects that you are concerned about, and anything else. I guess the third question would be anything else that you think that the team should know. So over to all of you for some responses. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to take another look at some of the ground rules as another visual aid to hopefully help gather some more thoughts for our group conversation, a little breakout group here in this main meeting room. I am going to thank you, Rhiannon. Thanks for your time. Catch you later. I'm going to share the slide from the final array proposal here in just a second. So hopefully you guys can see this okay. So what we're talking about in our little group is pros, cons, and other thoughts regarding the proposal for final array moving forward. So from the initial array cornerstones, the cornerstones for the proposed final array include the storage cornerstone, modified conveyance cornerstone, including flood walls, the hybrid cornerstone, and no action, with some additional potential for non-structural measures. And on the left, what does that hybrid cornerstone alternative look like for the final array? It would include the Manila Valley District Park Detention Basin, the Alawai Canal flood wall, and some potential additional measures would include the Woodlawn Bridge flood wall, Kauai Road flood wall, Makiki District Park Detention Basin, Kanaha flood wall, the Alawai Golf Course Detention Basin, and some non-structural measures to further reduce risk that are not shown. I'm going to give everybody a minute to look that over, and then we'll get back to our discussion. Okay, hopefully everybody's got a quick chance to look that over. I'm going to stop sharing so I can hopefully see everybody's faces, anybody who wants to turn their video on. And I am ready to hear some input. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see that chat. Sorry about that, Renee. I let the folks know, so hopefully somebody else can give you a hand. For the other folks, thank you for sticking around with me in this main meeting room. So our conversation in our little breakout group, we are talking about the proposed final array of different flood risk management options, some aspects that folks like, some aspects that folks have concerns with, and anything else that you might want the team to know. So, lost Glenn, thank you previously for your input. Anybody else who would like to share? Over to you. To hopefully help spark a little bit of conversation, I'm going to share those questions again that I just stated about the final array. So of the alternatives remaining in the proposed final array, which do you prefer? Which alternatives give you the most pause? And what do you want the project delivery team to know and consider as they begin the process of comparing alternatives and working toward a tentatively selected plan? Okay, I've given everybody a few minutes to reread the questions, and I think if I minimize those, yep. So that's the proposed final array cornerstones on the right, and the hybrid cornerstone proposal for final array on the left. So if anybody has any of those, wants to comment on some of the different aspects of the final array cornerstones, including the hybrid cornerstone. This is a good place to share some of those ideas about aspects that you prefer or aspects that give you pause or other stuff that you want the PDT to know. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing just in case somebody would like to have a comment and turn on their camera so we can see you. And if you're still thinking things over and you're not ready to comment in the moment, you can always take a quick photo of the slide currently up and comment at the primary project email address. So that's loi@honolulu.gov. So feel free to reach out to the project delivery team through that email address. For other folks that are maybe just joining and are in the main room, you have the option at this point to join some breakout sessions with other members of the project delivery team. For folks that just joined, my name is Vera Costello. I'm the Honolulu District Public Involvement Specialist. I'm also one of the regulators for the district. And so my role this evening is just to hear all of you, take some notes, and yeah, make sure that what you have to say reaches the project delivery team in real time. So if anybody's having trouble, I can try and shift you over to the breakout sessions, but might be even more effective if you want to give it a shot yourself. So under participants, there should be two buttons directly under participants. So that's in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. There's a little button for chat and another little button with a kind of person icon on it. If you click the person icon, it should open up participants. And then under that, there should be options at the top of the screen on the right-hand side for main meeting and breakout sessions. And then if you click on breakout sessions, you can see 3 different breakout sessions. And on the right-hand side, there is, of those 3 listed, there's a little blue hyperlink for join. And you can join and hear some of the discussion that some other folks in the breakout groups that have going on. So in the meantime, plenty of time for folks here in this main room to share comments. Luckily, there's not too many of us, so plenty of time available. I've got a couple folks on the line with who've just joined with phone numbers, and then a few other folks with names. So thank you so much for joining tonight's meeting. The team is really committed to transparency of the project and reaching out to the community to get input and try and make this the best project that it can be. So what we're discussing in our breakout groups right now is the proposed final array of different alternatives. And I will share for everybody to get on the same page in case we had anybody new join. So on the right, we have the final array cornerstones, including the storage cornerstone, modified conveyance cornerstone, including flood walls, the hybrid cornerstone, and the no action alternative. And that does include the potential for non-structural fixes in other locations that are not addressed by some of those other cornerstones. The hybrid cornerstone is shown in more detail on the left. The proposal for final array would include the 2 cornerstones of the Manoa Valley District Park Detention Basin and the LOI Canal flood wall. Additional measures within this proposed hybrid cornerstone for the proposal for the final array would also include the Woodlawn Bridge flood wall, the Kauai Road flood wall, the Makiki District Park Detention Basin, the Kanaha flood wall, the LOI Golf Course Detention Basin, and other non-structural measures that can reduce residual risk, but those are not shown. So I'll give everybody a minute to look over this, and we'll get back to our main room right after that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing these so that we can come back to the main screen. For those that are not as interested in speaking some comments aloud, you can feel free to chat those in, or you can also send them directly to the project delivery team via the email shown in number 6 at the bottom, alawai@honolulu.gov. So please feel free to share your thoughts in whatever way works best for you. Is everybody comfortable? I want to circle back to the first item in this list here about the raise the hand tool. Hopefully everybody is familiar with this, but at the bottom of your screen in WebEx, so it's three, kind of 2.5 buttons to the left of the red X. There's a teeny tiny hand, and you can raise your hand if you want to make sure that I see you, and so that we're not interrupting each other with sharing our thoughts. So that is how that works. And again, those are some of the questions that were brought up before we broke out into different breakout groups, were suggested questions, but if there's other stuff about the project that everyone would like to discuss, we can make time for that now as well. So I will turn it back over to all of you if anybody has anything else about the project that they would like to share and comment on at this time. So it might help perhaps to, let's see if we can move around the presentation a little bit, and hopefully you guys can see this. Okay, so our discussion, we're primarily thinking about, of the alternatives remaining in the proposed final array, which do you prefer? Which alternatives give you the most pause? And what do you want us, the PDT, the project delivery team, know and consider as they begin the process of comparing alternatives and working toward a tentatively selected plan? So let's see if we can go back a little farther and just make sure we're all on the same page as far as the information that you're thinking about for providing comments. Oh, so we are here in the main room. My name is Vera Costello. I am the Honolulu District Public Involvement Specialist. I'm also a regulator with the district, and I am here to listen to you. So we're going to go back a little farther. So this is what we're looking at in terms of proposed final array cornerstones on the right. Going back a little farther. So what is the proposed final array of alternatives? So it's an array of alternative plans to be compared against one another to then from that array select the tentatively selected plan. And that selection can be based on technical analysis and evaluation criteria to see how well each alternative meets the study objectives. So an important thing that you might be thinking about as you're preparing to share your input is how final is that proposed final array of alternatives? Well, changes can still be made to the alternatives, like measures added, removed, optimized, etc. And those changes will be driven by further evaluation and analysis, including input from all of you. And non-structural measures will receive additional consideration. However, once screened out, those alternatives that have been screened out are unlikely to be reincorporated into the final array of alternatives. So this is what I showed a little earlier, the hybrid cornerstone proposal for final array. The cornerstones for this option include the Manoa Valley District Park Detention Basin and the Alawai Canal floodwall, with additional measures including the Woodlawn Bridge floodwall, Koali Road floodwall, Makiki District Park Detention Basin, Kanaha floodwall, the Alawai Golf Course Detention Basin, and other non-structural measures to reduce residual risk. And so this is showing some of the options that were eliminated from, screened out rather, from the hybrid cornerstone plan. And this is sort of what that hybrid cornerstone had started with. So that's where we are so far. And I will go back to our topics for our discussion of the alternatives remaining in the proposed final array. Which do you prefer? What alternatives give you the most pause? And what do you want the PDT to know and consider as they begin the process of comparing alternatives and working toward a tentatively selected plan? So as you're thinking about your comments, we ask that folks stick to the ground rules. And if sharing your feedback aloud is not for you, we also have the option that you can chat in some comments, or you can send them directly to the PDT using the primary email address listed number 6 at the bottom, alawai@honolulu.gov. So thanks everybody for your patience. I did try to look through folks that were listed as not in session and who kindly were joining me here in the main room. I did try and assign folks to some breakout sessions, but it looks like maybe that didn't help. So luckily I am here in the main room and ready to take your comments. So for anybody that's just joining, and for those that have been here for a minute, I apologize for the redundancy, but here are the ground rules for our group discussion. And regarding the raise hand tool, well, so the chat is a button in the lower right-hand corner, and it looks like a little chat bubble. The raising the hand tool is 1, 2, 3, 4.5 buttons to the left of that, and it looks like a tiny little hand like this, and you can click on that, and then I will see that you're raising your hand so that we hopefully can not talk over each other. And introduce yourself. So I'll start. My name is Vera Costello. I am the Public Involvement Specialist with the Honolulu District, and I am also regulated with the district. And my role here is to facilitate our discussion here in the main room and make sure I note down all of your feedback to share with the project delivery team. For folks that are maybe not interested in commenting with your voice in real time, you can always feel free to chat in or send your thoughts and comments into the primary email address, which is listed number 6 at the bottom of the main screen here, alawai@honolulu.gov. So what we're talking about right now is the final array cornerstones. Of those alternatives remaining in the proposed final array, which do you prefer? Which alternatives give you the most pause? And what do you want the PDT to know and consider as they begin the process of comparing alternatives and working toward a tentatively selected plan? Okay, everybody. I think we've got maybe just a few more minutes before we get all back together as a big group. But what we are discussing in our breakout group is your thoughts on the proposed final array. Specifically, which alternatives in the proposed final array do you prefer? Which alternatives give you the most pause? What do you want the PDT to know and consider as they begin the process of comparing alternatives and working toward a tentatively selected plan? Okay, folks. Final warning for last chance for me to collect any comments. We'll be closing up all the breakout sessions in a little less than 30 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. All right, everyone. I think we're all back in the main room. Thank you so much for that. I know that in our group, we had a fantastic discussion, really good questions, you know, and suggestions and comments. So we're going to discuss that now. Let me move to, okay, work groups. Where are we? I think I'm a little lost in my slides. Okay, So we are now at the large group discussion. Each of the facilitators will report out to the larger group here. What are the key themes that we have heard, and the questions and comments and so forth. We'll try to do that relatively quickly, and then we can respond to any additional questions and suggestions from folks. So, so some of these questions and suggestions that we respond to, they might be things that we raise in our summaries. So for example, like maybe in Eric's group, there was a question that only Kelly can answer. And so so Eric can raise that, and then this will be an opportunity for Kelly to answer that question, just as an example. But also, if y'all have additional questions, comments that occur to you as we're doing this in this large group, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to address those as best we can with the time that we have. I will start actually, and then we'll go breakout. So we'll start with breakout 1, which is mine and Kelly's group, and then 2, and then 3, and then Vera with the main room. All right. So in breakout room 1, so we heard a number of different things. One of the, I think the biggest thing that we heard from several people was frustration with the watershed management measure being screened out. So there's, I think, people feel like that, that obviously contributes, as we have said earlier in the presentation, that even our modeling showed that it contributes to flooding to some degree, and there's a question as to whether our models have adequately captured the contribution of debris, to exacerbating flooding. There was a comment made that that is something that might be just inherently very difficult to model because it's kind of chaotic, and so there's a lot of frustration about that, and we should really reconsider that. In addition to that, we heard that frustration also that this is a sort of narrowly scoped plan. This is not a comprehensive approach. It's not a holistic approach. It's really narrowly focused on riverine flood risk management, and there's a desire to see more coordination with other agencies. So we addressed that somewhat. We have done some of that coordination, but acknowledging that yes, we have been given this charge by Congress to do a riverine flood risk management study. So therefore, this is really just a piece of the puzzle for the watershed, and we have to do our best to make sure that we complement whatever pieces of the puzzle may be out there. And maybe the watershed management might be one of those, but we'll see. A lot of work yet still needs to be done. There was a lot of talk about the canal and the canal walls, the need for pumps. There were questions about, well, if we put walls around the canal, for example, especially on the Mauka side, would that exacerbate flooding in Makoli, Mo'ili'ili, because it sort of creates a bowl, the rim of a bowl that holds the water in. And so have we modeled that adequately to make sure we know, what's going on with that? Also, how are we actually getting the water from from the canal coming down from the Malca side? How do we get that water and make sure that it goes into the detention area of the Alawai Golf Course? That there was some it wasn't clear from our explanation how that happens. And in general, there was also some confusion about the maps. And so I think we agreed that we need to do some work to make sure that those are clearer and the explanations of those things are clearer. And let's see, there were also a number of questions about sort of, what are things specifically going to look like? And, that's, I think, questions that will get into the design of specific measures and stuff that we can't really answer quite yet. But of course, people are very curious about how that's going to work. And so that's obviously, those details are going to be really important for us to work out and to consider the community's input as we look at that. What's the best way to shape those things so that they're not only effective but also acceptable to the community. And just lastly, there was one question about what's the maximum cost for the project, and I think we don't know yet, or at least those of us in our group, we didn't know if there was a number or a range and what that might be. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. But Kelly, was there anything else that I missed that you heard that needs to be said now?
I don't think so. I did write some notes and I captured the chat. So if there's anything, we can always revisit.
Great. And anyone else who was in, my group, if there was something, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll see if we'll circle back around. So breakout group 2.
Yes, hi everyone. This is Kendall coming to you tonight from 4 feet of snow up here in Alaska. We had a very productive conversation in group 2. There was a lot of overlap in some of the technical questions that I heard from group 1, and Eric was able to answer most of those. But our takeaways and some of the key points that we heard was a request for much more often communication, to really be much more engaged on this project with the communities, and particularly at the local neighborhood level, and to be more participatory, have a regular presence in some of the neighborhood boards and board meetings. We also had a request to take into consideration and pay attention to some of the local actions and efforts at the neighborhood level that are occurring, have been occurring, to take care of the neighborhoods and to help the communities retain some of their historic character and their community character. In doing so, one of the comments was that if to make any walls aesthetically pleasing and historically consistent. We also had a discussion on better maps, as I said in the chat, and the request was, for greater detail, not just simply, a key, but greater detail to the point where we're really understanding within the neighborhoods, within some of the key points in these alternatives, what is being effective, but also where are the benefits. And so much more interactive, kind of a better way of being able to engage the maps as opposed to just looking at a map and seeing where things are located across the landscape. Another question came up was whether the project could be phased in an effort to not only be more economical, but also to provide benefit immediately and kind of where people can see the benefits more immediate. So we also had the discussion of taking into consideration sea level rise, which I see has been adequately discussed in the chat. And I will let Eric talk some more if he has anything to add. But I think that our main takeaway was to continue the public engagement, to do it more often, to really increase it, and to do it at the local level. You want to add, Eric?
No, I think the only thing I would add is just to reiterate Ellen's concerns about our lack of response to her neighborhood board request, and that kind of ties back into being more engaged at the neighborhood board level. I think we're also going to take that feedback and look at our internal processes for how and who we receive those through, and making sure that something like that doesn't happen again. So I just did want to make that announcement in front of everybody that we'll be better and we'll do better on that front. Over.
appreciate that. Yeah, as I sort of briefly alluded to earlier, we kind of have started talking about how are we going to proceed with the next phase of public engagement moving forward. And, you know, we also sense that there's a need to shift things sort of to the next level. So I appreciate that feedback. Okay, so group 3.
So group number 3, we had a lot of great discussion. There was a lot of overlap with what group number 2 discussed, where there's a sentiment that there's a need to be more engaged with the community, especially at the local board level. You know, especially when we get closer to making a decision. But you know, the general sentiment that was expressed a lot was if we're going to be building a detention basin up at the Manoa Valley District Park, then we should really be consulting the residents up there and the people who impact them before actually moving forward with that. And it's generally, we want to keep that line of communication open with the community at the local board level and be transparent about what we're doing. Because it seemed like once we actually started talking about it, a lot of issues got resolved. So, and we kind of saw that in the breakout group where there's a lot of confusion at first, and then we started really talking about it in detail, and it resolved a lot of issues right there. So I think there might be a need to kind of revisit our communication plan and decide what is the best way to engage the community going forward. You know, additionally, on top of like putting a detention basin up in Manoa or Makiki, there was a lot of concerns about putting the Alawai Canal flood wall in and how that may impact some recreational activities down there, such as canoeing or, you know, even if we have to start to intrude on some property down there, like some tennis courts or something like that, in order to build a canal wall. So I think, you know, that's kind of a design level consideration, but I think it's important that we think about that going forward. Overall, it seemed like there was a lot of opposition to the flood walls down at the Alawai Canal, and I think there's just a lot of caution on going forward on not trying to make the same mistakes that maybe the previous study may have made. So just kind of be mindful of how we do our analysis and be mindful of how the community may be impacted by the flood walls. Just trying to look through my notes here. So I think those are the main things. There's a lot of discussion regarding previous studies and how we could probably draw a lot of insight from those if we haven't already. So it's probably worth the team maybe looking over some of the key data and key takeaways in those as we move forward. And I think those are the main things, unless Cindy, you think I missed something.
Yeah, I think the only other thing was there was some, I guess, mixed reactions to the tunnel concept. I guess we had one person who was strongly for it, and then I think in the chat somebody else was strongly against it. So, so there seems to be some mixed, I guess, preferences as to some of the alternatives.
All right, fair enough. Okay, Vera, what did you guys talk about in the main room?
Thanks, Tyson. We had one commenter who had some questions and concerns regarding the volume, the total volume capacity in some of the tributaries heading down to the Alawai Canal, like the Manoa Stream, and concerns that a more mid-Ahupua fix, like the detention basin at the Manoa District Park, wouldn't necessarily help residents that were located further Mauka. And so we've got to do out to connect this commenter and other folks who have a similar concern with Kelly, the technical lead, to try and get a sense of their specific risk relative to the model and whether they might be, whether non-structural fixes might be a good fit for them. And that's about it. Over to you.
Thank you, Vera. And you know, Vera had no wingman
It's easy.
room. So
Daniel can teach you.
I had to do all of it. So that you're a superstar, we appreciate it.
Why?
Sorry, we got a hot mic somewhere. I'm not sure where that's coming from. So Vera, you mentioned a question for Kelly there. Kelly, is that something you want to respond to? You can ask for clarification if you want to.
Yeah, I think as kind of Eric was going through the alternatives, there's nothing upstream of the Manoa Valley District Park. And we will be addressing any risk that we haven't within these alternatives by looking at non-structural measures. So that was the appropriate response, Vera.
Appreciate it. I want to, so there are ongoing discussions, excuse me, comments and questions in the chat. Please keep those coming. I'm going to take a sip of water. Please keep those coming. We still have another 20 minutes or so, so we've got some time, which is fantastic. I do want to address again the question of community engagement. We have kind of really just started that discussion of, like I said, how do we take things to the next level? What is appropriate for the rest of the study? You know, we've talked about meeting with neighborhood boards, doing targeted outreach for the Native Hawaiian community, and other things like that. So these are all things that we're discussing. You know, we of course have to balance. I mean, you know, if we could, we would do everything. We wouldn't even, you know, wouldn't even pause to think about it. But we have to sort of balance the resources that we have and make sure that we're spending them as wisely as possible, you know, as part of this plan. So that said, I do think that, you know, the team agrees with some of these comments that there needs to be additional efforts made on that front. Part of that also comes from, you know, when we had our in-person meeting in July, we had some new folks arrive at that meeting, and, you know, they hadn't been participating in these virtual meetings. And that was fantastic to have some new people come. But it also, you know, it highlighted for us that, hey, there are people out there who haven't been coming, right? And they really care and they have a stake in this. So that's, you know, part of our concern as well. How do we reach those folks that have not been coming to these meetings? So we definitely want to keep these communication lines open with those of you who are coming, who have been coming, who are here today, and hopefully will continue to come to future meetings. But ideally, we would like to expand, you know, our reach to those who haven't been able to make it or have chosen not to come for various reasons. So that's something that, you know, you all can help us with as well. So by all means, you know, encourage your friends, your colleagues to attend or to reach out, or let us know, you know, other ways that we can reach out. Some suggestions, of course, you've already provided. So we'll take all of that under consideration.
Hey, Tyson, why don't you
yeah,
do a television broadcast thing on Alelo? Look up with Alelo. Alelo films all the neighborhood board meetings. I bet they would give you a spot, and then you can just broadcast it to Hawaii at large.
All right. I love that idea. All right. I will talk to, I don't know fully what you're referring to since I'm, you know, over here in Alexandria, but I'll talk to Cindy and others about that. I love that. I love these ideas. Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, and I see some suggestions from Luciano and others in the chat. Yeah, please do keep those coming.
Tyson, Winston has his hand up, I think.
Oh, sorry, I missed that, Winston. Go ahead, chime in.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I put in a couple comments on the side, which is as in our group, we had a great talk with some folks, Eric and others, that you can't over communicate this and also or over engage the public. I don't think the people that are very interested in this are here now. But for those of you who don't live in Hawaii, we have an excellent system of neighborhood boards that are very close to which people have alluded to, or you have as well in summary, that you should have a standing position every month on the neighborhood boards. There's 7 of them in this watershed, Waikiki being one of them, Manoa, Pololo, Makiki, Moiliili, Macaulay, Kapahulu, Diamond Head, and who else am I forgetting? Anyway, the Board of Water Supply comes every month and updates everybody. But we also need this group to meet more regularly as a standing meeting. So you can update us not in June, not in September, but every Friday at 4, whatever it is you decide, and we come or we don't, but they're recorded, and so we can have updates as you guys are progressing, so that there's not surprises down the road in June, because that's where people really get upset, is then they feel like, whoa, none of my concerns were listened to. So I would strongly recommend that you do something like that. And maybe you want to consider getting some office space somewhere. I don't know, Moiliili or Manoa or somewhere where you could have people stopping by, a public information center where you're keeping the public really engaged, where they actually feel like they're being heard, and maybe you get some great ideas out of that. So we have this system that's set up, and again, you're not going to hit everybody going to those neighborhood board meetings. Sometimes they can be a little bit dry or strident, but I think they would be worth your while to have that. But I would like to see this group continue on a regular basis until the final nail is driven, if this project comes to fruition and whatever it does. That was just my 2 cents there. But I appreciate all of your, how we've come and how we're, I feel like you are listening to the community more than we have before. And we've got a lot of more ideas and a lot of ways it goes. But if we don't meet regularly, we won't be able to convey those in ways as we understand the nuances more. And as you understand, maybe something's not going to fly and you need to tell us why it's not going to fly, or as you consider alternatives as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Winston. Really appreciate that. We, of course, early in the study, we did I think, if you recall, our initial plan for public meetings was a lot fewer than we've done, right? And we heard clearly from you guys that you wanted a lot more. So we did change that. So we'll definitely consider those suggestions. There's a lot of great ideas. I know that if we could, we would certainly do all of them, but maybe we can at least do some of them and like you say, reap the benefits.
Yeah, hey, so let me jump in.
Yeah.
Winston, we had a great conversation, and in our group, somebody made the comment of, well, the Corps' got deep pockets. We can spend money, and Tyson alluded to the fact earlier that we do have to walk that line of, we have a budget, we were given X amount of money. And so we do have to live within that, right? And so not trying to discount these comments, because I wholeheartedly agree with them. But I do want to set the expectations that likely there is going to be a give and take, I think, right? And that we're likely not going to be able to do everything. I mean, I love the idea of setting up a spot, right, where people can come, an office, but I can, as the project manager, I can guarantee you that we don't have funding to rent out office space, right? Like that kind of thing. I know that was, so I'm just trying to temper expectations is all I'm trying to say. And that, yes, we want to continue to move forward in a way, right? We want to hear your concerns. We want to make sure that we're moving forward on a path that's, better than we have been. But I do want to temper expectations that we're likely not going to be able to do everything. But we'll, like I said earlier, try to be better moving forward. Over.
I think make an effort.
As you come here and you experience Hawaii more, and you guys are all 3 of you are in Alaska or Virginia, and you're from the South somewhere, Eric, or something. But I, it's such a precious little island in the middle of the Pacific that's just so fragile, and we're just all kind of holding on, and every little inch is precious, and it's hard to understand that from so far away. And we're very passionately committed to our neighborhoods, and we've had some missteps, from Red Hill is one that people are writing on the side. So there's work to be done, but when you see the scale out here, that's why maybe you guys need to have your meetings out here. And I don't think you'd object to flying out here, would you? Come on out. It lets you
Yeah, in
understand
fact,
our scale and our scope, and the passions, I think, better if you're able to do that. And anyway, thank you.
yeah, I totally understand. I did my dissertation in Japan, which has some similarities to Hawaii, obviously a lot of differences, but it also is, sort of that precious little gem of a small island with small amount of livable land space where people are kind of clinging to and everything. And also I know from that experience that you can't really fully appreciate things until you are there and you spend some time there. So I hear what you're saying, absolutely. Yes, and hearing a lot of suggestions to make sure that we interact with the neighborhood boards. I think that's a very clear suggestion that we will take very seriously. Okay, other comments or questions? Anybody else on seeing things in the chat that I have not seen or need to be addressed? Yes, right. Somebody mentioned the Navy, and I know there's another controversy with the Corps of Engineers on the Big Island going on right now. Different part of the Corps of Engineers, but canal water elevation needs to come down by the pump gate to use it as a drainage channel. Yeah. Okay, so this is all great. One of the things that I mentioned to my group is, and I'll say it again here, is that all of these questions and comments and suggestions, whether they're about the public engagement process or about technical, measures and alternatives, we're reviewing all of these, and we take them very seriously. And so we will definitely, go back, and if we think we need to reconsider something, we will. So this is, and also there's information that we're always learning from you guys, and some of it we may have missed, but certainly in the past there was stuff that we didn't know that we learned from the community. And so, I just want to reemphasize how critical this discussion is, and all of these meetings are. So I just really appreciate that. Let me just give us a look at what we have left here. So we're actually just really up against
Are we able to see, Tyson?
Yeah.
Can we have the data? Some of us here are pretty analytical, scientific people. And
that's for sure.
Is there a place where you can post the data so we can look at it and we can plug it into models and we can see if we agree or disagree with decisions or assumptions you made or conclusions that you drew? Because maybe not. Yeah. And so
Right.
I think we need to satisfy ourselves by seeing some raw data and not just hearing about it and how you modeled it. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Eric or Kelly, what can we provide and when with respect to that sort of thing publicly?
So it's a great question, and honestly, I'm not 100% sure I have the full answer. But generally speaking, in our planning process and the study process, the draft report would come out. It would go out for public review, agency technical review. I see you shaking your head. Hold on now. Let me. It's all right. It's all right. It goes out for public review, and and that includes all of the engineering appendices, right? All of the assumptions, all of the model results, all of the analytical, all the analyses that went into the decisions that were made, right? We have been trying to be, through this process, more transparent with those, right? So to date, we've been providing, you know, results and decisions through the management measure tracker, you know, through the plan formulation tracker. I understand it that, you know, that doesn't get to the analytical nuts and bolts of it that you're asking for. You know, we have our process in terms of things need to be reviewed internally, right, before we can really put a lot of things out. So there are review processes and internal processes that we as an agency have to follow. And so I feel like at some point we will be bound.
But you already have reviewed a lot of this, right? You've already reviewed it. That's how you came up with your alternatives, because you concluded it that based on your hydrology and whatever you're putting into the decision making of why you ruled out some alternatives and why you ruled some in. So that data is already data you've looked at. We don't want to wait till a final report and see all that stuff and hear how good you're doing about taking the data seriously. We just want the data before the final report. The data now, when we can help you, because maybe you made a mistake somewhere and we're going to find that. And we're going to be able to help you fix it now, because you said we're two peas in a pod, right? Isn't that what you said in our breakout session? Winston, what did you say? You're with us and we're with you and we're in the huddle and we're a hui now. So the hui needs the data. Yeah, we're a check and balance for each other, a regular brotherhood. So we need the data, yeah? Before any reports of your conclusions of the data, we just want the evidence. We want the stuff, yeah?
And Eric, if I can just jump in real quick, I just want to say, and I love what you're saying, Alan, that like with the management measure tracker, for example, and the plan formulation tracker, these are things that most teams from the Corps of Engineers, you know, don't do. I think, I don't know, like, and it sounds like Eric doesn't really know the official answer either, but what I think we can tell you is that we will absolutely go to the maximum limit that, you know, our rules and regulations allow in terms of sharing stuff with you guys, because that is what we have been trying to do the whole time. And I think that we'll continue to do that. Sorry, I interrupted, Eric. Go ahead.
Well, I can go on if Eric, did you want to say something first?
No, yeah, I think I'll say, Laura, Laura. So, Ellen, we hear your request, and I understand it, right? And I do, and so we'll take that back and figure out, you know, what and how we can share and when. And I do think that my only comment, and while you're talking, Alan, is that, you know, generally speaking, the way that these studies happen is, right, you wait till the final report. And so it feels like we should be giving a lot more right now. But, you know, you had said, well, everything's already been reviewed. Everything we presented has been reviewed internally. And that's not true, right? The formal agency reviews happen at the same time it gets reviewed by the public, right? I mean, we do some interim, you know, make sure checks to make sure everything's okay, right? But, like, we are engaging you to a greater extent than is normal, right? And so because of that, it most likely does feel like we should be providing more, but in reality, you're going through this process with us, right? So it's not like we have all the answers right now and they've been reviewed and we're kind of holding back information. We're presenting stuff as we figure it out, right? And so I do just want to make that note and say, again, we'll take that request back and figure out what and when we can share things, but we do have internal process and policy and I mean, I don't know, law probably that tells us when and what we can share. And so we do have to adhere to that. Otherwise we could get in big trouble. And if I lose my job, my wife will murder me, right? And then you'll never have to see me again, I guess. So maybe that's positive. But anyway, for you, but not for me.
I'd
Yeah,
like
I
to
think
weigh in a
it's
few
a different
things.
kind of review you're talking about there. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I suggested in the breakout session too. This is a very large project, and if you will come rethink it in terms of phases, because phase one is doable and is within budget, and things can be done to safeguard some of the things. And I'll just reiterate what I did to the group two, is to put 3-foot berms around all of the schools, to lower the Alloway golf course by probably about 3 feet or something like that, and have a little marsh area in the Mackay Eva corner, which would be very nice. That would, Judith Silgenbauer has already proposed that. And also to, yes, the understanding is to put a wall on the Waikiki side that's only 3 feet high than what it is now, and make it visually attractive like the other end of the Alloway Canal with the curves and everything. And I really want to be a part of that group that is deciding the visual elements as a public sculptor. I know what it is to have relevance to the community and to the cultural concerns. And and remind people again, the Alloway Canal is an historical location, a historical site. And so I would also just like to say sideways, Luciano said something that's very important too. The Macaulay Bridge needs to be fixed. And that just means add pedestrian and bicycle lanes, which is an easy thing to do to add on to that bridge. So anyway, my main concern, break it into a phase one, do what can be done right now, and then work on all of the other fine tuning that's going elsewhere. You're not going to get this big, gigantic thing going for a very long period of time, but you can get some of these things done basically right now. It's nothing to put berms up 3 feet around the schools with just a bulldozer and some dump trucks. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Laura. We'll definitely consider those suggestions. I think we're running out of time now, so I do need to bring us to a close. But before I do that, what are our next steps? Well, we're going to, review what we've heard here today, and also any ongoing feedback we receive. We got some wonderfully detailed emails already earlier today from Dave Watase, and please continue to send us emails, Dave and anyone else, with additional feedback and input. So we'll definitely do that. As we were just talking about a little bit earlier, we will be talking about, how and to what degree we're going to be sort of revamping the community engagement effort. So, that may affect things as well. We will finalize this proposed final alternatives array, and then the alternatives will be further evaluated and compared against each other, eventually to identify a tentatively selected plan. That's the TSP. A lot of you guys are, old hats at this already. The TSP will be a preliminary recommendation for the agency pending further feasibility level analysis and feedback, and then updates will continue to be published on the website. And I just also, something you said, Laura, reminded me that, even after we get to the recommended plan, then there's PED, which I forgot what that even stands for, Planning, Engineering, and Design, I think. So, there are a lot of steps remaining before we get to a solution. And, that flood wall around the canal, we don't even know yet if that's going to be in the tentatively selected plan, right? We don't know if that's going to be in the recommended plan. So those are things I'm glad that we're talking about. We have to talk about them. But yeah, we don't know what that plan is going to look like yet. And even once the plan is tentatively selected and recommended, there still are a lot of details to be worked out of what it's going to look like and how it's going to, right? A lot of those details. So there will continue to be many, many opportunities for community input at each step of the way. According to this, our original schedule, that the next public meetings would focus on that TSP and we're targeting the May to June timeframe for that. So again, we'll revisit this plan, but those meetings will at least include at least one in-person meeting. So we might do a virtual and an in-person, kind of like we did in July, but we haven't finalized that plan or anything yet, so we will see. So yes, one final thought from Ellen. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. You talked about your team, your study team. Yeah. So can you send us a list of who's on that team?
Well,
list the names. I want to know who's on the study team or who's making these decisions and who's studying this stuff. So I just want to know the players. Yeah. So if you could mail us that list, that'd be great.
Sure, and I mean most of the players, the management study team, you're looking at them. There are obviously other folks that work on different aspects of the analysis and stuff like that. So it's a much larger team. But I hear you, Ellen. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I would say, Ellen, honestly, when you reach out to the team, right, you send an email through the LOI email, and it comes directly to the management team. So Cindy, myself, Tyson, Kelly. From a technical standpoint, I think that's mostly what you're interested in. Kelly manages that team and can address, we can address as a management team any questions that you have and any comments that you have. I think, when we start reaching out to individual team members, their job is not to engage, right? Their job is to produce and execute. And so we want to make sure that we're filtering that information through the management team, because ultimately, right, we're the ones that are kind of controlling how things are executed. So that's the best way to move forward on that server.
Yeah, I do appreciate that interest though. Okay, so thank you for everything, you guys. Again, this has been an incredibly productive and useful workshop for us, and I hope it has been for you all as well. And we will be seeing you again soon, one way or another. Mahalo.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas. Happy holiday.
Aloha.
I'm now going to end the recording.